Thank you for joining us. You're listening to the Write Project podcast and radio program. This is a show about writing and modern Newfoundland author culture. This program is produced and recorded at CHMR FM 93.5 FM in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, and is aired on other great stations in the province and elsewhere in the country. It can also be heard online at www.chmr.ca. I'm your host, Matthew LeDrew, author of the Xander Drew series and founder at Engine Books. Let's see what we have today.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining me for another very special episode of the Write Project podcast. This one, I know I say every episode is special, but this one really is. We are on the line with one of Newfoundland's most storied authors. We're on the line with Kevin Major, author of 1 for the Rock, 2 for the Tablelands, 3 for Trinity most recently, Land Beyond the Sea, Found Far and Wide, a host, an amazing library of titles, including, he doesn't know this yet, but the first chapter novel I ever read. That kind of started me on my writing journey, which was Holdfast, a source of extreme inspiration for me. An amazing author. Thank you for coming on with us, Kevin.
Very pleased to be here, Matthew.
Yeah. Thank you for having us. So I wanted to ask you about, I've had a chance to read a little bit of 3 for Trinity so far, but I haven't read the previous 2, and I'm going to have to go back and see what the character Sam Sinnard was doing before now, I think, because it's really getting my attention. How did you come to this series, if I can ask?
Let's say I had come off a trilogy of historical novels that all 3 involved a lot of research, and I was kind of in the mood for something that didn't require so much time to research and to write. My wife said to me, "Kevin, you had a good sense of humor. Sometimes it's not coming out in your books." So I decided to give a try at writing a murder mystery with a sense of humor. The main character, Sebastian Sinnard, is to begin with, he's a tour guide. I've done a bit of tour guiding myself. But then in the course of 1 for the Rock, one of the members of his tour group ends up over the cliff on the North Side Trail of, Signal Hill. So in the course of that, he investigates, tries to figure out why or how this. And then I thought, well, this seems to work. People enjoyed the book. I thought, yeah, he's a tour guide, and I picked that for a specific reason, because I thought if I'm going to do future books, I can set them in different parts of Newfoundland and Labrador. So, the second one took place partly in Gros Morne, 2 for the Tablelands. This one is on the Bonavista Peninsula in Trinity for the most part. Again, because for years I had worked with Rising Tide Theatre in writing scripts, and that were produced by them. Probably the best known is No Man's Land, which had been on stage in Trinity for maybe a dozen years. So I knew Donna Butt really well, the artistic director, and I thought, I think I'd kind of like to set a novel in Trinity, a murder mystery, and involve Rising Tide Theatre. So I don't know if you know Donna, but she's a bit of a character to begin with.
Yeah, absolutely.
I said, Donna, well, how do you feel about if I used you in a book as yourself? And she hesitated a bit, but not for long. I mean, Donna's always a risk taker. So she finally gave me the okay. And so, 3 for Trinity is the result of my taking that on.
That's excellent. That's really fun. I gotta say, I love this series and that concept of like a tour guide doing it, because it gives an excuse to have some of the historical aspects that are in a lot of your novels in there, because he's already an expert. But there's also this kind of Dan Brown, James Patterson-ish to even the titles, like the 1 for the Rock and stuff like that. It's very like it's very Patterson. I really like it. The idea of the Sunday murder mystery solver. You know what I mean? Like someone who's just, this isn't their day job. They're just doing it for fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't wonder.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's really interesting. Do you think you'll continue past 3?
I think so. I'm under contract with Breakwater to do up to 5. So 2 more to go with that contract. And if it works out, I mean, it's something that I've enjoyed a lot. And my schedule enables me to pretty well bring one out each year, each fall. I can set a schedule for myself. And I thoroughly enjoyed kind of sitting down every morning and spending 3 hours following along with the story of Sebastian and what he's up to. I mean, part of it as well is that he changes as a character. He's not the person he was in the first book that he is in the third. He goes in and out of relationships. He has a teenage son that he has shared custody with his ex-wife. And so, the kid, Nick, is in junior high when the first book opens, his own concerns, own situation, and that Sebastian has to deal with. So my idea is that we move around with the stories in different parts of the province, but as well the ongoing characters evolve as well and take on a different role, different attitude towards life, and so on.
Excellent. Awesome. Can I ask you just for a minute? I know we're talking about your new books and stuff like that, but I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about one of the first books I ever read, which was Holdfast. Can I ask you anything about? I don't even know what I'm going to ask you. It's been so long since I read it, but it just stands out to me as I think every Newfoundland author has this. The first book you read, it was one of the first books I read, like a chapter book, like on my own, one that I wasn't assigned, that I picked off the shelf by myself, kind of thing. But also, it was it's definitely the first book by a Newfoundlander that I read, and it's a very interesting moment for every Newfoundland writer, I think, when you go, oh, we can do this too. We're allowed. Pardon you. You know what I mean? Also, the first book I ever read that had any kind of curse word in it, which was super fun because I was like, "Oh, you're allowed to curse? I'm going to do that a lot." That's you're to blame for a lot of the curse words I've said.
Yeah. Well, Holdfast was my first published book. It wasn't the first that I wrote. I wrote a novel before that that's never been published. I had been a teacher. And I taught kids at that age. I taught junior high for the most part. And, teaching them English literature, the books that we had available, they often couldn't really relate to. And, you had some people who were readers naturally. They love books anyway. But for the people that didn't come easily to reading, I thought, what they need is something that reflects their own lives. And so I set about was Holdfast. I don't know if you know the history of it in terms of its acceptance in the Newfoundland school system, for example, because my feeling was that if this book is good enough, then it should make its way and be accessible for kids to pick up. I mean, most outpour kids are not in reach of a library necessarily, or definitely not a bookstore. So I was with these books. So I did that. The book got a lot of attention. Won a Governor General's Award, won a couple of other awards. But because we had a denominational school system at the time, and you made reference to some of the strong language in the book, it didn't find its way into schools, which, unless they were predictive of using it. So here I was, an award-winning author, and the book was being used in schools in Nova Scotia. And I thought, what is going on here? But, it didn't really change. And though we moved into a public system, people are maybe a bit more aware of the book, but it never did, to my mind, get the attention that it really for young people at the time. I mean, you came to the book, I don't know how, but it was of your own initiative. And
it was definitely on the shelf at my school. Now, how it got there, I don't think it was on the curriculum. It was just like there was a shelf in the back and the teacher stocked the shelf. So it could have been that the teacher picked it up themselves and put it there.
Okay. Yeah. Good.
Yep. So that's a good example of a teacher kind of taking the initiative on themselves, I imagine. Yeah. But yeah, no, I loved it. I went through and read a good chunk of your library after that, or at least what was available to me at the time for a while. For a while, you were not a real person. You were like Stephen King. It's like they're over there somewhere.
Well, you had that experience, but I also had that experience when I was growing up, thinking about being a writer in Newfoundland. I mean, we didn't know any writers. We didn't know they existed in Newfoundland. Until I'm, the person that stands out in my mind is Harold Horwood. Tomorrow will be Sunday, and Foxes of Beach Cove, and so on. And here he was writing books that were distributed in Newfoundland, but being well received across Canada and in other parts of North America. And I thought, well, this is not so distant as I might think. Perhaps there is a place for me to, try to get a book published. So that feeling of writing being somewhat distant and removed from your everyday life was there certainly when I was growing up and thinking about writing. Yeah.
I think there's always going to be a little bit of that, because what gets marketed to children and the youth is very much big five. You know what I mean? It's the big publishers. It's either the big five in all the forms of media. So it's always there's always a shock in some people's eyes when they learn that there are Newfoundland publishers at all, which is always surprising. But yeah. Yeah, even in this age, which is shocking.
Yeah.
Kevin Major, how long were you a part-time writer before you became a full-time one?
Oh, well, I had been a teacher and I gave up teaching full-time and I started writing, but I was continuing to substitute for a while. So I would say I was maybe about 10 years combining the two, writing and substitute teaching. So that would bring me kind of the very early 1990s that I became what I would consider a full-time writer. So that, that's now over 30 years. So.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Awesome.
You say you're a full-time writer, but you do combine it with some other things related to writing. Speaking at conferences or doing workshops, of course, or in my case, I got asked to do some kind of tourist guiding because I wrote a lot about the history of Newfoundland. In fact, I wrote a book solely about that. So it branches off, and my income is not certainly solely from writing.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of I feel like there are very few authors that make their living solely off advances and royalties, like only the fiction. And because of that, I feel like a lot of writers kind of have that imposter syndrome where they say they're not really a writer, they're a tour guide that also writes. You know what I mean? And this is what everyone's doing. This is just the realities of the industry. Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Kevin Major, have you ever considered writing under a pseudonym?
I hadn't really, no. That's an interesting question. Even though I've written gone in a lot of different directions with my writing. I started out with what were termed young adult novels. You mentioned a series of them. Then I branched into more adult writing, like No Man's Land was the first. and then I also wrote books for younger kids as well. And, sometimes I had the feeling that if you had established your name in one particular genre, branching out into another, it might somewhat be advantageous to, write under a slightly different name. I don't really want to do that. So no, I hadn't really seriously considered it.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. Kevin Major, what is your writing kryptonite? What is something that if you're trying to write, if this thing happens, it just stops the writing process for that day?
Oh, you know what? There's overly tired and having a hard night before, probably not very much. I write early in the morning. It's my best time. I get up early. I get up like 4:35. Settle down. Nobody else in the house is awake except for the dog. And I have 3 hours of concentrated time that I can devote without any interruption. And that seems to work really well for me. I didn't do that in the beginning, actually, I in the evenings, but I took on a number of writing projects that required a lot of commitment of time, and I found I meet the deadline. So I came to enjoy that time a lot. I especially like this time of the year when it's actually dark when I get up, and you open the blinds and it gradually gets daylight in the course of the 3 hours. So it's that concentrated time. I'll spend a little time reading what I wrote the day before, polishing that up, and then it's kind of an automatic jumping off point into adding another page to the manuscript. So, other than something drastic happening in your personal life, there's nothing really that stops me from making that effort pretty well every day. If I go for a certain length of time without having that outlet of writing, and then I kind of get a little bit antsy.
Yep.
So
that's funny, actually. I'm very much the same way. I get up early and write, and very little can distract me. And I also get kind of keyed up if I go more than a few days without. You start to get anxiety.
Yeah, I do that. I feel that. Yeah.
Cool. Interesting. Kevin Major, what is your favorite childhood book? Either a book you read when you were a child, or some people pick a book they read to their children, but favorite childhood book?
Well, I think back to, fairly young. I don't remember having access to, the kind of classic of books of young kids, like, Beatrice Potter or some of the others of that genre that are so well known. I remember specifically as a growing young man really liking the Ian Fleming books, the James Bond books. Why? Well, they were pretty exciting. And it's about all that I had access to, in a sense. We didn't have a library in the school. There was a public library, but it was very limited in what it had to offer. So, my parents were, my father, not so much my mother. My father was a bit of a reader, but, he wasn't broadly read. And so I wasn't being introduced into books by my family. So I had to kind of find my own way. So classic books of childhood years really went by me. When I became a parent and have two now grown sons, I was able to share some of those books with them, and it would have been the first time for both of us.
Wow, that's great. I really like the Ian Fleming James Bonds. Actually, I read them as an adult, but they're good. They're solid. I had endeavored to write a spy novel myself, and I had this idea that I was going to write a kind of an anti-James Bond novel. And I was like, oh, so I'll read the James Bond novels so I'll know what not to do. And then I read them and I realized that the novels are so far removed from the movies that the novels basically are anti-James Bond novels.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. It torpedoed the whole project because I was like, oh, it's been done. That's what that is already. Kevin Major, what did you do with your first advance or the first money you made from your writing? I guess we're going back to Holdfast with that one.
Yeah, and the advance for Holdfast was $500. Not a lot of money even in those times. I don't know if I directed it towards anything in particular. At that time, I was writing longhand. The computers hadn't. They did. I embraced them fairly quickly. So maybe it was helping to pay the rent. I can't really think. What I do remember though is the phone call that I got from the publisher. Now, no publisher that no longer exists in Toronto, called Clark Irwin, and the editor phoned me and said, we'd like to publish this book. And we think it needs a little bit of work, but I'll work with you. And what do you think? And, I can remember specifically where the phone was, the building, kind of standing there and somewhat dumbfounded and just ecstatic about spent this year writing that book. And now somebody actually wanted to take it on and publish it. So there. As regards to the advance, I'm not sure what I did with it.
That's fine. I can imagine. I would. I can imagine you would remember exactly where you were when that call came in. Absolutely. Yeah. Kevin Major, what was an early experience or any experience, I guess, where you learned that language had power?
Wow.
Yeah, that's our big heavy question.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I hadn't really thought about that too much. I think for me personally, and I have to go to my own writing for this. When I started first with Holdfast, it got a good reception to begin with, and it at the time, there were a lot of kind of reading programs, and I was invited to go on a series of these, leaving Newfoundland, flying to Alberta, traipsing around different parts of Alberta over 10 days and going into schools and doing readings to kids. And, here was a book set in Newfoundland, pretty much removed from their experience, yet they seem to relate to it, to the character. So I guess what I drew from that is that the writing I did, the way I approached the writing was that, the Newfoundland dialect is part of it, that gives the flavor of it. But at the center is growing up, and he's growing up and dealing with pretty well the same things that young people grow up with anywhere. So if you can I found out if you could tap into that, then the response you're going to get can be very meaningful and supportive and encouraging. If I go a step further from that to when some of my books were then made into plays. Okay, so I wrote scripts for. We'll take No Man's Land as the example because it's probably the best known. So Donna Butt of Rising Tide said, "Kevin, do you think this could turn into a play?" And I said, "Well, I'm not so sure. Some of the things that take place in the book would be really hard to stage. A full-fledged battle scene wouldn't really work. But I think there's a way around it." And so I went ahead with it, and with Donna's help, and we polished things out, the production, and staged it. And oh wow, I sat in the audience, the very opening performance, and I think it was probably opened on July 1st. I think it was 2001. And the story is about the Battle of Beaumont Hamel. And just to feel, I hesitate to say electricity, but I was feeling what the audience was feeling and their reaction to it. So in terms of the power of language, the words coming out of those actors' mouths seem to strike chords with people. And, the reaction, that's a great thing about theater, or could be could be the not so great thing if it doesn't work. But, you're getting immediate reaction to the words that you put together. So those maybe are a couple of examples of how I came to learn really the power of kind of the well-chosen words, I guess.
Beautiful. It's beautiful. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's wonderful. I had goosebumps during some of that answer. That was nice. Yeah, I can't imagine the play experience. That's something I don't think I'll ever get into, but it must be an interesting experience to see someone performing your words and see this because you can't watch someone even beyond seeing it in being performed, but you can't see someone read your book in real time, really, but you can see them enjoy the play and the impact of your words on them.
Yeah. It's a when it works, it's there's nothing like live theater when it can work well, and I think Rising Tide Donna did a great job in staging. That will always stay with me.
Excellent. Kevin Major, if this is a silly question, we're going right from a heavy question to a very silly question. But if your writingness, if your body of work was transformed into an animal by a magic spell, what animal would that be?
Well, if you could take a fish as an animal, I would say a codfish, because invariably I go back to my Newfoundland environment and my Newfoundland to find my voice in writing. Very rarely do I not have some connection. Newfoundland doesn't have some connection to what I put down on paper. And my father was a fisherman initially. I lived in Outport, Newfoundland for a good stretch of time. And that fish is such tremendous importance. It's what caused us to be settled. It's what governed the lives of the people of the province for centuries. And it to me, I guess it's symbolic of a lot of what kind of the ebb and flow, I suppose, of life in Newfoundland. We go from Cabot being able to put a basket over the side and pull up, it full of fish to the two, and that the impact of both that and all the range of things in between really kind of, I guess, defined us as a people, and that translates to me as a writer, because I guess at the core of my writing, want to say something about growing up here and its impact on my life.
Of course. Excellent. Yeah, no, that's a wonderful answer. I think that's a bit more thoughtful than we usually get for that one, but that's beautiful. Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Well, Kevin Major, I'd like to say once again, thank you for joining us on the Right Project podcast. I'll stop taking up so much of your time, but please, everyone listening, check out 3 for Trinity and the 2 books starring Sebastian Sinner that came out before it in his mystery series, the Offbeat Humor Mystery Series. They're really good books from what I've been reading of them. I got the previous 2 put on my Christmas list there now. Thank you for joining me on here, Kevin. It's been talking to you has been a wonderful experience, especially given, again, one of the first novels I ever read.
Oh, well, I appreciate that very much, Matthew, and it has been enjoyable, but this I've thoroughly enjoyed, and the questions were a little bit different and made me have to think about long and hard sometimes, but all in all, I thought it went very well. So thank you for your interest.